Ready for part 2 of our workshop. It's time to discuss vulnerability assessment and resilience action plan. Bring it on.
Mayor, good afternoon, commissioners. Yes, that is the first of our 2 workshops with the Office of Resilience this afternoon. With us for the first one, Megan Houston, your director, Jake Leach and Natalie Frenberg from Office of Resilience staff, and Ryan Mayer from the County Attorney's Office. And Megan is going to take it away and begin the process.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having us today. We're going to start things off by having Dr. Jake Leach provide a little bit of background on our greenhouse gas emissions in Palm Beach County and why they're important. We'll then talk about some of the best practices we've done here in Palm Beach County already to make these cost-effective reductions. And then we'll explore something called Race to Zero and whether we want or how we could pursue greenhouse gas reduction targets by looking at options that are available. And then Natalie will finish up by talking about how we could roll that into an existing funding opportunity to have that menu of options should the board wish to pursue this direction. With that, I'll hand it over to Dr. Leach.
Thank you, Megan. I'm Dr. Jake Leach. I'm with the Office of Resilience, and I'm responsible for tracking greenhouse gases at the county. So the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, is a UN initiative that brings together scientists from across the world to report on greenhouse gases and climate change. Recently, the IPCC reported that a 1.5 degrees centigrade, that's 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit, increase in temperature above pre-industrial levels would cause significant changes to temperature, rainfall, sea level, and coastlines. On top of that, a 2 degrees centigrade, which is 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit increase in temperature, would cause similar changes, but of a noticeably greater magnitude. And to put this in kind of a context, the Earth is already, due to human actions, 1 degree centigrade, which is 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit, above pre-industrial levels. So we're already half to 3/4 of the way there, depending on which limit you're looking at. If we want to reduce the negative consequences of climate change, we need to do our part to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. I want to stress that climate change mitigation solutions are neither just bottom-up or top-down. They're needed at all levels, from collective individual action all the way to national and global action. The greenhouse gas reduction potential of Palm Beach County in and of itself might seem small compared to global emissions, but combined with the actions of our fellow local governments, we can have a real impact on atmospheric chemistry, as well as inspiring action by other stakeholders. I'll also add that the county already does a really great job of adapting to climate change and mitigating climate change, but that there's always room to do more. So how do we track greenhouse gases at the county? Like a lot of other local jurisdictions, we use a tracking software called the ICLEI ClearPath tool. By measuring our greenhouse gases and figuring out which gases are being emitted from where and how much, we can move towards managing our emissions, because you manage what you measure, right? So this ClearPath tool, it's widely used, it's a third-party protocol, and it's for inventorying greenhouse gases. It lets us estimate our emissions as best we can, depending on the data we have available to us. There's always going to be estimates. By using a common protocol, we are able theoretically to compare Palm Beach County's emissions to other jurisdictions in an apples-to-apples manner. In reality, because the inventories are so complex, they do tend to have a lot of caveats, and we'll mention a couple of those as we go through today. Additionally, the protocols actually have 2 tracks. One covers local government operations. In this case, that would be all emissions from sources that are under the operational control of the Palm Beach County Board of County Commissioners. You may be familiar with this body. The other covers community-wide emissions, so that's all emissions within the geographical boundaries of Palm Beach County, incorporated and unincorporated. They cover direct emissions, so that's things like car tailpipe emissions inside the county, and specifically indirect emissions from electricity production. There are a couple of others that are usually covered, but they don't apply for Palm Beach County. It does not currently include carbon sinks or offsets, although the protocol has been recently updated to include some of these. And it also doesn't include what are called Scope 3 emissions. That's indirect emissions that are associated with all kinds of other stuff. For example, the emissions associated with bringing food from outside the country into Palm Beach County. It gets kind of complicated, so we don't do it. Environmental Resources Management completed the county's first inventory. That covered local government operations only. It covered the years 2011 to 2015. After the Office of Resilience was formed, we updated that inventory to cover 2011 through 2017, and we also expanded it to cover community-wide emissions as well as local government. Besides being complex, it's a really collaborative project. We require a lot of data, a lot of cooperation from a lot of county departments, as well as a lot of external stakeholders. So I'd just like to take a moment to thank everybody who sort of cooperated with this and supplied data and things like that. It's been really great. So here are our local government ops emissions from 2011 through 2017. As you can see, they've decreased over time. That's partly due to a cleaner grid electricity. Over time, FPL is emitting less greenhouse gases per kilowatt hour, but it's also been due to a reduction in fleet use of fuel, which has been really great. As I said, there are a few caveats and discrepancies. We know that there are some issues with wastewater here, with palm tree emissions and a couple of others. We're working with those departments to get those kinks out. But overall, this does give us a good sense of where our emissions are coming from, and it's accurate enough, I think, to give us a good picture. I do want to note that here specifically, it looks like water and wastewater, which are these yellow and blue here, do represent a fairly large slice of the pie. That's because it represents the water and wastewater emissions associated with usage by 500,000 people, right? Not everybody in the county goes to the library every single day, but everybody in the county uses water every day, uses wastewater every day. So that tends to increase that slice of the pie. I do want to point out that most of those emissions are associated with electricity. And if you look at the sort of per household use, it's very, very low. Wastewater and water services are less than 5% of sort of a typical household electricity usage.
And if I may interrupt real quick, it looks like there's a translation issue with the labeling. So we realize you cannot see which these emissions are tagged to. So we will provide an updated copy.
Sorry about that. You should be able to see them in your packets. No? Excellent.
I'm not sure. Yeah.
If we move on to community-wide, here's our community-wide results. The two big slices at the bottom here are total grid electricity usage in the county and transportation, so on-road cars and things like that. The total here for 2017 is about 16 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent. That works out to about 10 tons per capita. That compares very favorably with national averages and also the per capita averages for sort of our peer counties here in Southeast Florida. Again, we've got some caveats. For example, we don't have data from the seaport at the moment, although we're working on it. We've got a couple of non-county operated airports that are missing. And again, we're working to get that data. But again, overall, this is, I think, quite accurate. It's close enough, I think. And with that, I will turn it over to Megan Houston.
Thank you, Jake. I'm going to now focus on some of what we are doing really well on and why we, compared nationally, have a pretty good per capita emissions rate. Next slide. Some of these initiatives you've seen before in other presentations. So energy efficiency, we do a good job of looking for that low-hanging fruit, swapping out our LED fixtures, looking at how we can make HVAC improvements that will be more energy efficient. Some examples here include Vista Center's garage, reducing energy kilowatt hours by 15%, looking at technology at PBSO facilities, and again, replacing those LED fixtures, not just interior lighting, but in our sports facilities as well. On the renewable energy side, we are looking to how we can expand our involvement with this. We're participating with FPL Solar Together pilot program with water utilities subscribing to a pilot amount for that. We also, as you know, oversee the administration of Property Assessed Clean Energy Financing, which finances renewable energy for homeowners and businesses. We looked at streamlining our solar permitting with our PZ&B folks, getting that down to 3-day permitting, and that helped us achieve Soul Smart Gold designation. And then the picture we love to keep on using, our governmental center EV pilot that we have here with our first test pilot there. So we are expanding electric vehicle chargers throughout the county through this pilot program. We're also looking at how we can increase that infrastructure in our PalmTran buses. We are continuing to look at how we can update the Uniform Land Development Code to provide, to incentivize the market in certain developments on the private sector as well. All of these are working together to not only reduce how much energy we are using, but switching that source to a cleaner form of that energy. Next slide. Because of this work that we've done, we have some notoriety here. We, as you know, achieved LEED Gold certification in 2020. That is a national and global standards showing that we are doing our part in maintaining a sustainable community. We also have been participating with the Florida Green Building Coalition for quite some time now with silver designation, and we were recertified a few years ago. And then our rating agencies are starting to look at and ask the questions about our resiliency and our mitigation strategies. So a quote is listed here from S&P Global when they last reviewed us. They said part of the reason you're maintaining your AAA bond rating is because of what you're doing to plan for future sea level rise events and other climate change impacts. But we still, as Jake mentioned earlier, there's always room for opportunity. So we're here today to ask, what would you like us to do next? We have inventoried our greenhouse gas emissions. We don't currently, as a county, have a greenhouse gas emissions reduction target. That's something pretty, that's becoming more of a best practice in communities who are leading the charge on sustainability. And so we're here today to talk about what we could do and how we could start to look at options for setting a target or bringing our emissions even further down. You might have heard this term race to zero or net zero. It's becoming more and more prevalent in the local jurisdiction sustainability world. It means reducing our greenhouse gas emissions so much that where we cannot reduce, we are using cleaner sources, to make up that need for that fuel source, and then offsetting anything we can't reduce through kind of carbon sequestration or carbon sinks. In a city, that would be something like electrifying everything as much as possible, including cars, fleet, buildings, and then having that energy source be from a renewable energy provider as much as possible, and then getting credit for where we can't do that through our natural areas, our agricultural lands, those kinds of carbon sinks. So a few organizations at the bottom have formed this Race to Zero initiative. ICLEI, that's the tool that we use, or the group we work with to use our inventory tool. World Resources Institute, others listed here, have said, back to Jake's earlier point, we are facing pretty daunting challenges to reduce our emissions globally. If we're not working together, if we're not focused on the cities and the counties who have that direct connection with their communities to unify around this common initiative, this common goal of this net zero emissions, then we might fall short and we might see more of those impacts that Jake had spoken about earlier. So there's this Race to Zero campaign. It's where cities and counties can sign up to say, hey, we understand this emergency. We are committed to working together. We know, this kind of like reducing 80% by 2050 is not enough. We need to really say the new goal is this net zero initiative. And it's to rally that support so that these communities are working together. So as Jake also mentioned, Palm Beach County might be a small jurisdiction globally, but when everyone starts to work together to build that momentum, you can see big impact. What this Race to Zero pledge is asking communities to do is to say, we endorse those Race to Zero principles. We're going to try to get to net zero by 2050 with interim targets along the way. We're going to plan and have that action plan to get there. We're going to figure out what to do and not just wait for that deadline to approach. We're going to immediately start with this high impact action item, which could be something like, work with utilities to look at emissions reduction strategies, or provide rebates for certain housing upgrades. But it's also individually tailored through this organization, where they would say, okay, let's work with that county or jurisdiction to say what would be a high impact action item that works for you that you could start doing, and then report on actions annually. And you can see on the left the list of our peers who are doing this and saying we are committed to Race to Zero is ever growing. West Palm, Boynton, Broward, Miami-Dade County, and many more in Florida, many more nationally are saying, yes, we are in. Some examples of how this gets translated into an action plan are listed here. It's things like, let's look at benchmarking the energy and water consumption of our buildings. Let's increase tree canopy coverage. So a lot of steps that we're familiar with, and in addition to steps that we're already taking, would be part of this kind of Race to Zero plan. So I'll shift it over to Natalie in a minute, but before I do, the summary page is why should we think about doing this? Well, at different times, if you can remember pre-COVID world times, we were talking about greenhouse gas emissions reduction strategies in this county, and kind of working with our municipalities to try and unify around a common goal. So that has come up before at various junctions with different board members asking about this. Our peers are doing this, and it's something our office gets community input from through email or at public meetings, asking what we are doing to further reduce our emissions. And then, it does take this unified approach to make a big change globally. Next slide. And now I'll turn it over to Natalie Frenberg, who will talk about how we can examine the options and see what it would take through an existing funding strategy that we have.
Thank you, Megan, and good afternoon, everyone. So the Office of Resilience recently accepted a grant through the Florida Department of Economic Opportunity, and we would like to discuss integrating greenhouse gas emissions mitigation actions into the Resilience Action Plan of this project. So it's important to consider both the impacts of climate change on the county, as well as how the county is contributing to the cause, and explore ways to reduce these impacts. We think that it is time to take a stronger approach and see what kind of commitments we could make. And with this $800,000 DEO grant to pursue climate change vulnerability assessment and a resilience action plan, we're set up really well to do so. With this grant project, it'll be done in 2 phases. The first phase is the vulnerability assessment, and the second is the resilience action plan. During the first phase, we will be considering various risks associated with climate change, reviewing the many assets in the county, analyzing which assets are vulnerable to the various climate threats, and then in the next phase, the Resilience Action Plan will use the results of the vulnerability assessment to create a prioritized list of projects that would make the county more resilient to these climate threats. These would include project descriptions, estimated costs, and it would set us up really well to apply for funding opportunities to address these issues. So through this Resilience Action Plan, we have the opportunity to also develop a plan that can include strategies for achieving net zero greenhouse gas emissions. This project will take 3 to 4 years to get to the final plan, and we're going to have a lot of community input along the way. We have joined with ICLEI to get a science-based greenhouse gas target on what it would look like for Palm Beach County to do its share to keep global temperatures under 2 degrees Celsius. And meanwhile, we will continue to look for cost-effective greenhouse gas reduction strategies to implement within county operations. We would like to ask the board for direction to include these strategies for achieving net zero emissions and associated cost and financing options in the Resilience Action Plan for Palm Beach County. This will help us identify how feasible and cost-effective net zero is, and if and how we can achieve it. So we're not asking for any funding or action yet. We would be given a menu of options to consider for various ways to lower our greenhouse gas emissions. We recommend that we start this conversation and start exploring the feasibility of various greenhouse gas reduction options. So next, I'll pass it back to Patrick Rudder to wrap up this discussion.
And then just to emphasize Natalie's point, the direction we're seeking from the board on that last slide there is seeking the board's direction to include in the vulnerability analysis grant and the resulting work that will go with it, the direction to assess the feasibility of looking at net zero. I think it's a very efficient way of doing it, best timing for it. All the players, all the pieces will be in play and working at that time, and just a good opportunity to be able to bring back something to the board eventually to explain feasibility pieces of it, what it might look like, and for the board to consider as we move on down the road. So you might remember we had the agreement brought to you very recently, a few months ago or so. So we were very early in the process. Timing couldn't be better, and we're happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Rudder, and thank you, everybody, for your input. We're going to take our comments from our resident experts on the environment, and Mr. Martin, you're going to be first. So come on up and join us, and behind Drew will be Linda Smith, and then that will be followed by Gail Ladd. So take your places and give us your 3 minutes of thought. Drew?
Drew Martin, I'm the Conservation Chair for the Loxahatchee Group of the Sierra Club. I'm also a member of the Zero Waste team and the Marine team for the National Sierra Club. And I am the co-chair for the National Sierra Club's Single-Use Plastics Elimination Committee. I really appreciate the staffs. I mean, I think that you've had a resiliency department for a number of years. I'm going to guess at least 5 years. And I know Natalie Schneider was headed that before Megan. And, you know, I think they've really made a lot of good efforts. But the reality is you haven't really moved that fast. And I think you need to move a lot faster. I mean, you have a good team. I mean, you know, I've lifted my hands on, you know, out to this, you know, you have a strong team of people with a lot of good background. But I don't know if any of you had a chance to watch Nova this last week or Frontline. But really interesting. You know, the Exxon basically knew about this in the 1970s, and they covered it up. I don't know, I doubt the legislature is going to let you do a carbon tax, but boy, that would be great. I really would like to see all the vehicles in the county be electric. I don't think that's, I don't know about the sheriff. I know the sheriff will probably push back, but the reality is most of those vehicles are used during the day. They should be able to be charged overnight. Every building in the county should really be rooftop solar. And I think those should be goals. The other thing is we need to do way more to protect our tree canopy and our agricultural lands that sequester carbon and our wetlands. Pavement is not going to do the job. On development, how many times do we ask a developer to put in rooftop solar? Why not? On single-use plastics, which I know you're going to discuss in the next hour, I'm hoping I'll be able to make a public comment. I have to go to work, so you may have to read my comments. But there should be no single-use plastics. Every item purchased should have recyclable content in it, including your paper, not just calling it sustainable, but actually having it. There should be 100% recycling of paper. Air conditioners should be set, I'm sorry to say, it's 76, 78. I know I'm not going to get a lot of fans. I don't use air conditioning. When I wash my hands in a bucket and I flush the toilet with that. I hand water my yard. I ride a bicycle to work. I don't expect other people to do that. But we have to move, and we need to move quickly. You have a good team, but you need to do a lot more, a lot faster. Thank you.
As always, thank you, Mr. Martin. Ms. Smith, your turn.
Linda Smith, Jupiter, Florida. On Bruce's comment, I know Palm Beach County has passed a resolution for a carbon tax. So, we just have to get Washington DC to move that on, and maybe there's a way Palm Beach County can do that, I don't know. And I don't think we should necessarily count on other communities. I want Palm Beach County to be a leader on this. That said, you may or may not know that the village of Tequesta has also embarked on this, and they have, they're innovative. And they don't have the staff and they don't have the team that maybe we have here in Palm Beach County, and they have determined to stick with it, however, and they are going to take an additional 6 months, maybe
only 4 months to complete their greenhouse gas emission survey so that they know where they are and they know what they can do to try to mitigate it. So please don't be discouraged. I know we can do a great job if we all work together. You may or may not know that FP&L has a program to evaluate your fleet and determine how to transition to electric vehicles. That's not the buses, that's, building inspectors, that's health inspectors, it's whatever kind of Palm Beach County fleet vehicle there is, and they will obviously also help you to install the EV charging stations. FP&L has a vested interest in that, and I get that, and it's all good, and maybe you can take advantage of that, or maybe you already are. It has been proven that if we reduce water consumption, we will double or possibly triple dip on reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. If you reduce portable water use, you're obviously going to be reducing solar use as well, which reduces the electricity use. And just briefly speaking about water, I do have a petition form for a constitutional amendment on the right to clean and healthy waterways. If you want to sign, you don't need your voter registration, just your birthday. I'll be sitting over there. And your AAA bond rating is affected, as they said during the presentation, on resiliency. And as you're going to discuss at single-use plastics in another hour, if you reduce your use of single-use plastics, you are obviously reducing your greenhouse gas emissions, because plastic comes from oil and gas, and to create plastics, you are creating greenhouse gas emissions. So that is a way to double dip if you reduce your single-use plastics. There is copies of this that I'm going to talk about in the next session. Also, Broward County was going to vote on their resolution this morning. I haven't heard yet if it passed. I'm going to assume it did. You can take this printout and change Broward to Palm Beach, and you could be done with it. And as always, if there's anything that I can do to help, whether it's research or get other people out to talk to other people, whatever, let me know.
Smith, your time has elapsed. I'm going to fire the vice mayor. He's
Sorry, I didn't hear the beep. I'm sorry.
We're working on that. We're working on that. All right, Ms. Ladd, you
Hi.
have the final say on this item.
Okay, Gail Ladd, she could have my 16 seconds. No. I just want to say thank you to the staff. It looks like you have a wonderful staff that's working on this problem, but I have to 100% agree with Drew and Linda, of course, that we need to work even faster. We can't be slow on this at all. The first Earth Day was 52 years ago, and if we had done what we needed to do 52 years ago, we wouldn't be in this situation. So I really thank and say kudos to what we've been doing so far, but as we all know, it's at emergency time. We are at the brink. I want to just mention, too, that I noticed that if we develop carbon sinks in natural areas and agricultural preserves like the Ag Reserve and not do development, concrete does not work. We need the green, and we need to be fully green. So let's go for that greenhouse emissions target. Let's go for it. Let's do it as soon as we can. And I know your public will be behind you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ladd. And I think, this county needs to be proud of Green K. It certainly is a testament to what you can do as far as resiliency. The nature center there is something to behold. Taking that wastewater and pushing it out and turning it into a park is beautiful. I think we can be very proud of the fact that we have a waste-to-energy plant, one of the first here in Florida, and we're taking the waste from Broward and bringing it up here and turning that into energy. So I think we've made major accomplishments. I mean, certainly I like the picture of me standing by my car, and even though our county administrator isn't here, I usually heckle her about the EVs and the need to increase that within our county, but I think that's going to happen on its own. I think the president has made it clear that there are going to be programs to, influence the manufacturers to continue in that direction. And I can see from the last time I watched television, most of the TV commercials now are talking about EVs versus gas guzzlers. So I think that we are making progress. Vice Mayor Weiss, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Jake, Natalie, and Megan. I always appreciate hearing from you. We don't get to hear from you enough. So, and I appreciate you bringing to light that I assume for myself, many people, we probably think we would like to move faster, but acknowledging over the last 7 years the 12% decrease in greenhouse gases. That's 1%, 1.5% a year. So it adds up, and I think that was your point too, that there are things that can do. As it revolve or your request to the board, I would totally support giving your office direction to assess the feasibility and cost of reaching net zero emissions for both countywide and county government inventories. So I'm totally supportive of that. And then a couple of things I'd like to ask you all about. What can individuals do? And you talked a little earlier about the low-hanging fruit. What can our residents do that could have significant impact while not necessarily huge lifestyle changes? What kinds of things would you all be recommending?
Sure, great question, and something we are asked about at these various events. I mean, I'll first, the overarching theme is what can our residents do? It's to stay informed, empowered, engaged, and ask our leaders, share their concerns as our residents are doing today, and looking for those bigger policy moves that can help drive the needle. At an individual level, I mean, it's knowing how your own energy consumption is tracking. FPL does a pretty good job about providing year-over-year comparisons on your utility bill. You can look at that and see if something might be malfunctioning. You can look at your own, end-of-life estimates for your HVAC equipment and not be caught off guard when you have to replace that system, so that you are picking one that might be more efficient or might be a lot more efficient than what you're using, and that can have dramatic impacts on your overall utility bills. So reducing the need in your own house for energy consumption is one that we start looking at. It's inspiring others by your actions. I mean, if you're riding to work or taking PalmTran and letting people know about that, and I think that's a wonderful thing. Natalie rides her bike to work sometimes, and it's always fun to see when she comes through that office, and that it's exciting. We're like, yeah, you did that, and it. I've done it a few times before the second kid came around, so I've done my own bike rides to work. But it's all those things about changing personal habits that are not too draconian, but they're getting people ready for that next wave. And I think that's something our younger generation understands, and and embodies, and so those are some of the things that I would recommend. Natalie or Jake, you want to add anything? Okay.
Well, thank you. I had the opportunity on Friday it was Earth Day last Friday. I got to spend some time with some high school students and I guess elementary school students and really talking about that. If everybody does a little bit, it adds up very quickly. So we can, if we all do a small part. Another interesting statistic, though, I heard is Bitcoin mining and the amount of electricity now that's utilizing, which is like 0.5% of all the electricity being consumed on this planet. 91 terabytes or terawatts of electricity being consumed annually to do Bitcoin mining. So maybe there's some areas there that people can think about on how they might improve. But I think it's great, and I would totally support having a net zero and a goal of 2050 and hopefully 2030. That I know that's a big stretch, but those are all things that I think our community would benefit from. I mean, we are at ground zero as it relates to sea level rise. I mean, South Florida, I mean, it doesn't get much lower and flatter than where we live, and so we're going to feel the effects, and our neighbors south are going to get it a little earlier than we are, but we're all going to feel the effects of that over the next years. If we don't do something about it and take responsibility, we're putting ourselves in a precarious place.
So we're going to ban Bitcoin mining in Palm Beach County?
I think people need to be responsible and understand that there is an impact to what they're doing. And so people think sitting around and doing their Bitcoin mining, they're using electricity and you know, yeah, people have decisions to make, but there's responsibility that goes along with every decision that we do make. So.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mayor.
Recognizing Mary Beth Morrison, our Director of Environmental Programs from our friends over at the Solid Waste Authority. Nice to have you here. Yeah, I think that we all agree that we need to do more. I like the fact that unlike our TPA, where we say we have Vision Zero and we're just going to stop the carnage on the highways, we realize this is not going to be something that we can turn the tap and immediately change our ways. One of the things that the Vice Mayor and I were alluding to at one point was the fact that, you know, we have other projects in this county out in the glades. Tellus, the remanufacturing of the stalks from the sugarcane and turning those into implements for eating, you know, plates and forks. I mean, that's a great opportunity that I think that demonstrates that there is a will to turn things around. And look, I think we all acknowledge that there's more we can do, whether it's going to be putting solar panels upstairs or, you know, putting more EV chargers in our garage. Oh, hi, you're back. You know, I think there's opportunities, and we'll certainly work towards it, and hopefully won't overheat this planet before our great-grandchildren get to enjoy it. I see one more light, so Commissioner Arena.
I'm all for raising the temperature in the building. My office is 70. I have a sweater hanging behind my door. There's a blanket over here that Ms. Melissa and I share all the time. So I'm all good with raising the temperature in the building.
All right, one vote for raising the temperature. All right, we're going to move on to the next item. We're not going to wait for 3 o'clock since there's no reason that we can't move on to single-use plastics. So let's open the curtain on our last item for the day.
Mayor, just to confirm, board's direction is consistent with the action we had. Just making sure.
Yeah.
And if you don't mind, give us 2 seconds as we bring
That's
a few
fine.
more folks up for this presentation.
You gonna go get a sweater? Is that what you said? Oh, single-use water? No, thank you. I have my multi-use cup.
There's room for everyone up here, but I have notes for you. Maybe if you want to sit down there and then.
I can sit right here, Natalie.
That's mine.
Represent,
We're not going anywhere.
Matt, from CDT.
Okay, you get up, sure.
Sit back here.
Who's going to identify themselves as lawyers? All right, glass, we can recycle that. We just burn it all.
No, I'm fine here, I think.
They won't take our shit.
So who actually recycles it?
Jennifer, you can sit up.
All right, who's taking charge of this chapter of our resiliency?
I get to do the quick introduction, Mayor. I think the gang's all here. So, comfortably nestled in here. Thank you. As you see, you have a number of folks, and I think best bet might be as we work through their portions of the presentation, everyone can introduce themselves if necessary. So yes, this work with CDT, single-use plastic presentation, wanted to run through a number of best practices, thoughts, work that's been done within the county, and then we'll work our way towards seeking some direction from the board on moving forward with other ideas as well that have been developed in the course of time. So with that, Megan or Jake is going to lead us off.
Here's
Thank you,
Megan.
Patrick. And as Patrick mentioned, Megan Houston, Director of Resilience. This is a big group. This is a joint project that Office of Resilience and the Environmental Protection, CDT, started working on when we got direction a few months ago to look into single-use plastic and waste reduction. So not only do you have the folks here, you might have a couple more members from the environmental CDT in the audience. So we have, if you're part of the CDT, please raise your hand. Thank you. Big group effort here. On the agenda today, we are going to hear a little bit about single-use plastic and polystyrene. We're going to talk about why that is an potential problem in Palm Beach County. We're going to look at regulations throughout the state that allow us to impose some waste reduction strategies. We'll look at what other ordinances in our peer communities have in them and how they've been addressing this. Then we'll again talk about what the Palm Beach County government here is doing to promote best practices, and then again asking for your direction on strategies that you'd like us to pursue. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Jake Leach again, who is an expert in polymers.
Good afternoon, board. I'm still Dr. Jake Leach. I'm still with the Office of Resilience, and I do have some expertise in polymers, actually. So first, a brief overview. Plastics are first developed in the late 19th century, but it's not until the early 20th century that mass production of them begins. As with a lot of modern materials and modern systems, production expands greatly during the mid-20th century, especially during the Second World War. By the 60s, however, the 1960s, people are starting to notice an accumulation of plastic trash and litter around the place, and it starts becoming an issue. And in various guises, it's been an issue ever since, from sort of this so-called Crying Indian ad back in the 60s and 70s, the crisis with styrofoam, Big Mac containers in the 80s, and today sort of this Great Pacific Garbage Patch. Next slide, please. So what is a plastic? Plastics are a type of chemical called a polymer, which is sort of a very long, stringy polymer. They're very large synthetic molecules. They are almost all synthesized from chemicals that are derived from oil, although we're going to see a couple of exceptions a little later. Their names often have poly at the beginning, like polyethylene. And one type that we're going to be discussing today is polystyrene, which is a plastic. It comes in both rigid and foam forms. You've probably heard of styrofoam. This is a trademark name for one of the versions of that foam. Plastics are cheap and easy to manufacture. They have some really great material properties. In a lot of ways, they're absolutely magnificent materials that have really revolutionized the way that we live. They're very valuable and useful materials. Next slide, please. However, because of their low cost, they can be very disposable. About half of plastic items that are produced today are what we call single-use plastics. They're intended to be used a single time and then disposed of. In Palm Beach County, that generally means that the user puts the item into the recycling stream, where it is eventually sold on to be remade into a new product. Or it gets put into the regular garbage stream, and in Palm Beach County, that means that it gets incinerated to generate power. The board mentioned the waste-to-energy systems that we have in the county a little earlier. I will mention here that plastic recycling requires plastics to be sorted at some point by type, because there are a lot of different kinds, in order to be sort of sold on to somebody who's going to recycle them. There are about 7 different types of plastics that can be recycled, but contamination is a real issue when we get either plastics mixing or stuff that isn't plastic getting mixed in with those types. In Palm Beach County, polystyrene foam is not currently accepted for recycling because there's no market for it. Non-foam polystyrene is bundled into a less valuable mixed plastics bucket, which also may be less sellable. Next slide, please. I mentioned earlier that there are some plastics that are not made from oil derivatives. A small section of the market are what are called bioplastics. These are synthesized from renewable sources, such as chemicals derived from biomass or corn. Some, but not all, types of bioplastic are biodegradable. When they are biodegradable, they often require conditions that aren't found in your typical soil, backyard composting bins, or the marine environment. In fact, they need industrial-grade composters to break those materials down into compost. And those are not commercially available in Palm Beach County at this time. So in Palm Beach County, these items either end up in trash and get incinerated for power, or they end up in the recycling stream. And in this case, because they're not recyclable, they actually contaminate that recycling stream. Next slide, please. So when plastic enters the waste stream, it can be recycled or it can be incinerated. But as you probably realize, not all plastic does make it into the waste stream. Plus, only about 10% of plastics get recycled. They're not sort of infinitely recyclable. They can only be recycled a couple of times, so there are limits on that. So yeah, some of this plastic actually ends up as litter and trash sort of out in the environment. And because of the sort of durability of these materials, that's one of the desirable properties when we're manufacturing these materials. You know, once they get into the environment, they persist for a while, right? They're not going to break down. They can be unsightly, and it can cause other problems. Next slide, please. So in fact, there are a couple of concerns with plastics. There are health concerns. Plastics can have health consequences during manufacturing. They're often made from sort of fairly nasty precursor molecules. During use of plastic materials, certain chemicals can leach from them and be ingested. You might be familiar with sort of plastic bottles and cups being labeled as BPA-free. That's one of these chemicals that can leach and that we're trying to reduce. And then at the end of the life, they can also enter the food chain. They can be consumed. Turtles, for example, can eat deflated balloons and grocery bags because they think that they're jellyfish. And also these plastics will sort of mechanically break down into very, very small microscopic parts, and they can be ingested as sort of accidentally because of that. And I'll turn it over to Will Carey from the Engineering and Public Works Department for an overview of the economic concerns. Will?
Thank you. Will Carey. I'm with Palm Beach County Engineering, Roadway Production Division. I have a few notes about stormwater and our stormwater collection system, how plastics has impacted that. So as mentioned, plastics are hard to recycle, and because of it, we're seeing an abnormal percentage of it out in the road system. It's increasing the cost of our road stormwater maintenance, and it's creating a negative aesthetic within communities, especially underserved communities where fast food would be more prevalent. These plastics are going through the stormwater system and ending up in our lakes, rivers, and beaches, inland waterways, and we think it's creating a negative appeal to our tourism within the county. And it just gives a perceived lack of environmental commitment from the county. Next slide, please. So what are we actually collecting? In 2021, our engineering department collected about 683 cubic yards of debris material from our stormwater collection system and our roadways. And street sweepers swept about another 2,604 cubic yards of materials from curb and gutter and off the road. We estimate that approximately 10% of those numbers is single-use plastics. And that adds up to approximately 164 pickup trucks worth of material per year that we're looking at. And there's some pictures up on the slides of various stormwater inlets and our dump site that we have collected. So with that, I'd like to move it over to Michael Stahl with the Environmental Resources Department for an overview of environmental concerns.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Vice Mayor, Commissioners, Administrator Baker. So single-use, Michael Stahl, Deputy Director with Environmental Resources Management. Single-use and polystyrene plastics easily blow out of trucks and landfills and are consistently among the top 10 items removed from beaches in the annual International Coastal Cleanup. This litter can persist in the environment for hundreds of years, as Jake had mentioned, but during that time, it can contaminate local ecosystems and threaten local wildlife. Plastic production and use is also a contributor of climate change, which creates greenhouse gas emissions during production, manufacturing, recycling, and incineration of plastic items. Next slide, please. and parks regularly host environmental volunteer cleanup events. And just some notable statistics: in 2021, volunteers donated 1,525 hours of labor to cleaning up county natural areas. Volunteers removed 19,430 pounds of litter from the natural areas. Parks hosted 138 cleanup events, which removed 14,291 pounds of litter from county parks and beaches. So as you can tell, a tremendous amount of time and effort is put in by county staff and volunteers to keep our parks, beaches, and natural areas free of plastic litter so that our residents and visitors can enjoy the natural treasures that Palm Beach County has to offer. Next slide, please. This slide demonstrates that there are many nonprofit community groups and for-profit businesses that are working to address the issue of plastic waste around the South Florida and around the country. Initiatives to reduce plastic waste are gaining momentum, as evident in the abundance and diversity of concerned citizen groups and businesses. So next, I'll turn it over to Jennifer Cirillo with Parks and Rec to review the current state of plastic waste and successes.
Thank you, Mike. Jennifer Cirillo, Assistant Director, Palm Beach County Parks and Recreation. We're now going to touch on the Palm Beach County government practices. We have made some progress in terms of sustainable procurement over the years, including a sustainable paper purchasing policy and a styrofoam purchasing reduction. In 2021, staff was given board direction to look into options for single-use plastic reduction within the county. Since then, staff have researched relevant state statute, ordinances passed by other Florida municipalities, conducted a survey of county departments, and met with the departments to discuss impacts of possible restrictions. We're here today to present those findings and ask for further board direction on this initiative. Next slide, please. Although there is not a countywide policy on single-use plastics, many individual Palm Beach County departments have put effort into reducing their own plastic waste and enacting department rules by using alternatives, recycling, and providing water refill stations. Next, I'm going to turn it over to Ron Rice with Palm Beach County UF-IFAS Extension Office to review the results of our departmental survey.
All right, thanks, Jennifer. Ron Rice, Extension Department. In 2021, the Office of Resilience and the Environmental CDT designed a survey that was sent out to county departments and divisions. The overall objectives were to identify which styrofoam and single-use plastic products were routinely being used. We also wanted to gauge how burdensome it might be if usage was restricted. And also we wanted to identify if there was any specific exceptions to consider. The 43 return surveys represented 21 different departments. We found several departments to be fairly heavy users, and the Office of Resilience followed up with those departments to find out why that was the case. One question we had for all departments is whether volume usage was fundamentally important in some way, or if usage trends were just reflecting convenience and habits, something that could be reviewed and modified. Overall, we received positive feedback for exploring this initiative with our survey effort. Next slide, please. So the first part of our survey focused on polystyrene usage. And not surprisingly, the most popular styrofoam products were foodware items, like plates, bowls, cups, other food-related containers. Those are the tall bars there. What's important is that 93% of our department surveys indicated that restrictions on the use of styrofoam products would either not be burdensome or only just slightly burdensome to their operations. Next slide, please. As for single-use plastics, plastic products, again, the greatest usage occurred with foodware items, the usual plates, bowls, cups, but then also cutlery, plastic stirrers, straws, and then other plastic stuff related to celebrations like balloons and confetti. In this case, 73% of our surveys indicating that the restrictions on single-use plastic products would either not be burdensome or just slightly so to their operations. All right, no surprise here. Single-use plastic water bottles are a popular convenience item and purchased and used by roughly 58% of our department survey respondents. So we find that people tend to value their bottled water the most, with a lower 63% of surveys indicating that restrictions would either not be burdensome or only slightly burdensome to their operations. That's just a brief overview. I'll hand the floor over to Natalie Frenberg with the Office of Resilience, and she'll give you an overview of state statutes and local ordinances that relate to regulations on polystyrene and single-use plastics.
Thank you, Ron. Hello again, I'm Natalie from the Office of Resilience. So currently there are some state statutes that preempt what plastic items local governments are allowed to regulate. Palm Beach County is not allowed to regulate polystyrene items or plastic bags countywide. We are, however, allowed to regulate these items within county operations, on county land, and by county vendors. With plastic utensils, we are allowed to regulate them, and no municipalities in Florida have currently banned them countywide, but it is legally an option, and there's no preemption on them. Other potential options for this include an extra fee on them or a request only, or by request only law. So if we did restrict those, it would save businesses money while also reducing plastic waste. There are many municipalities within Palm Beach County that have already passed ordinances addressing single-use plastics and polystyrene plastic waste. These include restrictions on polystyrene foam products, balloons, confetti, plastic straws, and stirrers. And these restrictions are on city property and rights of way in city facilities and in city contracts. So you can see on this slide some of our municipalities within our own county, some details on what they've been up to with their single-use plastic restrictions. Next slide, please. There's also some other counties within Florida that have put in restrictions, and I'm just highlighting two on this slide. So in Broward County, they're restricting foodware items, unencapsulated, expanded polystyrene, so styrofoam products, single-use plastic beverage straws and stirrers, and also confetti, balloons, and sky lanterns. And in Orange County, Florida, they're restricting single-use plastic products and plastic bags. They're also encouraging reusable, recyclable, biodegradable, and compostable material. And they have a list of approved sustainable products for when single-use items must be purchased, but they encourage reusable whenever they can. And on this slide, there's a spreadsheet of a bunch of other ones across the state, and we're not going to go into in as much detail, but just so you can see how many are taking these restrictions into action. Most of them are with contracts and vendors, and there are some that restrict the use on municipal property, and there's also a few that have restrictions with their businesses, but these were put into place before the preemptions were passed. Next slide, please. So after researching what we're allowed to do, what our other partners have done in municipalities and in counties, and by talking to our different departments, we've come up with some different options that we'd like to share with you all and get direction back on what you would like us to implement. So this first slide is some less restrictive options. So these ones would be a little bit easier for the county to implement, and these include restricting foodware items, so plates, bowls, cups, trays, food containers, straws and stirrers, single-use coffee pods, plastic bags, and party decorations such as balloons and confetti. We think it would also be an easier option to work with businesses to start a green business recognition program. And businesses could qualify for this recognition by taking action such as eliminating straws, plastic bags, or having an opt-in single-use plastic utensil program. And we also, under this option, think we could increase staff knowledge of plastic waste reduction strategies and recycling best practices. Some restrictions that would be a little bit more difficult to implement, but definitely still reasonable, would include eliminating the purchasing, distribution of single-use plastic, including the ones in the last slide, but also plastic utensils. Also, limiting the use of plastic beverage bottles. We could encourage reusable water bottles and cups, increase the availability of filtered water, and encourage the use of canned beverages, including canned water, soda, sparkling water, sports drinks, and energy drinks. We could also require 50% recycled content in plastic garbage bags and discourage the use of bioplastics as an alternative to single-use plastics. And some of the most restrictive options that we would legally allow to be able to do and that we've come across in other municipalities in Florida include restricting the sale, use, and distribution of single-use plastic utensils in unincorporated Palm Beach County, restricting the sale, use, and distribution of straws in unincorporated Palm Beach County, and restricting the use of all single-use plastics on county-owned property, including by staff bringing in their own single-use plastic and polystyrene items. So these are possibilities for us as well, but they would be a bit more difficult to enforce. If the board wanted to take this progressive of an approach, it would require a longer phase-in period and definitely an education campaign. Slide. So there are some exceptions as well that we would want to consider when making some restrictions on single-use plastics. So these would include prepackaged foods that have already been filled and sealed prior to receipt, ADA accommodations for individuals with qualifying disabilities, food distribution drives, and when suitable sustainable alternatives are not available due to supply shortages. It would also include some exceptions for emergency, medical, and sanitary fieldwork situations. And then to make the transition easier, staff would recommend that any restrictions only apply to contracts, agreements, and permits that are issued after the effective date of these restrictions. So any issued prior would be exempt from the restrictions until their contract or agreement is renewed. Next, I'm going to pass it to Megan Houston with the Office of Resilience to cover some sustainable alternatives and implementation considerations.
Thank you, Natalie. So we have, we have alternatives for polystyrene hot and cold beverages that include compostable paper and compostable sugarcane byproduct, which is something we talked about earlier with Telus. Both of these options are currently in the warehouse catalog. And then reusable options are, of course, a great way to reduce waste, and those can be washed at home or at our sinks here to be used over and over again. For the plates and bowls, it's similar to the cups. There are compostable paper, sugarcane, and reusable options. The county currently stocks all of these options, as well as styrofoam for bowls and plates. On the utensil side, the single-use plastic typical example is on the left, but there are alternative options, including bamboo utensils, chopsticks, and then reusable and travel options that you see more and more of and that are given out here in Palm Beach County too with some of our wellness giveaway items. For plastic drink containers, the typical example that we see on the vending machines are on the left, but on the right there really are a lot of options, from our water filters, water coolers, having cooler services and contracts, Our water refill stations people love. I mean, we got one in fourth floor Vista. Thank you, FDO, and it's just been amazing. And Parks has been doing a great job of putting those out at facilities too. So that's been really popular. As Natalie and others mentioned, there's canned water options out there too. And then, of course, bringing in your reusable bottled water makes it all possible to use these other options. On the straws and stirs, it's a little bit more, some people really don't like those plastic straws, but there are other options. There are bamboo straws, there are metal straws, there are straws being made from avocado pits. I mean, the ingenuity here just keeps growing and growing. So there are plenty of options here. On the event party decoration side, we all know what plastic balloons look like, but there are different options, paper decorations, there are confetti options made out of paper and other paper products that can be reused again and again. So of course, we want to highlight some of the cost differentials here. There's a reason styrofoam exists. It's cheap, it's easy to make, but it, compared to the other options like compostable paper cups, those are about 3.5 times as much money in our warehouse. The sugarcane byproduct option is about 6.5 times. So that sounds, I think, potentially alarming. But what we're saying is we don't need to do a one-to-one switch, right? The goal is to reduce the need to have the item that we throw away in the first place by encouraging reusable options. And where we need to make those exceptions, because we're reducing the amount of inventory that we need, it hopefully should break closer to even or not be that 3.5 or 6.5 times increase. So we would recommend encouraging reusable cutlery and foodware. Also looking at more economical options, continue to do price checks and make sure we have these options available within our inventory. And then finally, just a way that we can rethink how we serve events. Remember that there are different options, paper sleeves and different platter options for serving food. Fruit comes with its own wrapper many times, as we all know, with our oranges and bananas. So we can be creative here and see what kind of options we can encourage throughout the county. Considerations for some sort of potential restriction would be, we would recommend education rather than a punishment. We want, it would take a lead time to roll this out. It wouldn't happen overnight. Depending on what we do, it would take longer. For some departments, they might have funds to do that switch to encourage more reusable options and buy that inventory. Others might have to wait, or it would be helpful for them to have some of that initial funding. We mentioned water coolers. People like that system generally. And then on the enforcement side, there are different options that we could choose if we were going to pursue one of these restrictions, terminating contractual relationships. Some jurisdictions are issuing fines. Some operate solely on a complaint basis, kind of like our COVID days where people were reporting on things that they saw. So different things to think about there. And one thing before I'll say is that generally when we talk to our peers, our municipal peers about this, and they're saying residents generally have been supportive of this. Businesses have been supportive of this once they figure it out. Oh, this is actually what consumers are asking for and want and are happy about when it actually is taking place. So with that, I'll turn it back to Patrick, who will wrap it up today.
So direction we're looking for, actually, Megan, would you click that next slide? Thanks. Couple different things. As you look at those two columns, and the direction we're seeking is whom to include and what to include. And don't mean this as some measure of an exclusive matrix and checking each box, but getting some general direction. Certainly you can see there are elements of it that we would control at the county level, be it our departments, our property, our vendors, versus Megan was just alluding to talking about our businesses. And then also the what part to include, and identified a number of items there, and I think you heard through the presentation touching on those as well. Can't emphasize enough, our departments have done so much through the years recently and continue to do so just by way of normal practice. And the one that always comes to me every time I eat my lunch, we signed up for the wellness program, I believe it was last year, we got a stainless steel set of utensils, which I use, and I have to go clean after each meal. But it's a habit, it's a practice, and when we talk about changing those practices, you offer something. It's not just the stick that's out there. There's the carrot. Megan discussed the water bottle refilling station, so much more convenient than other areas where you can take your bottle and use it. So it's just a matter of helping folks along, understanding those different practices that serve the greater purpose as well. So as you look through this, we're just looking for that general direction and where the board might want to go, and nudge us along in where to look and how to go back and work regulatory wise or just within the our county operations and what the board might want to see happening. So with that, thank all this members of this group for putting a lot of work into not just what you see here today, but so much work that's gone into it behind the scenes for a while now, and a lot of folks putting a lot of time and effort into it. So with that, be happy to take any questions you have.
Thank you, Patrick, Megan, and everybody else. All right, let's take our public comment. Mr. Martin, come on back up. You didn't leave yet, so we're going to give you 3 minutes. Linda Smith, why don't you take your microphone again on the right, and my right, your left. And then Gail Ladd, you'll be next. And finally, Sheila. Okay, you heard him. You'll be fourth. Okay, Drew.
Drew Martin, again, Conservation Chair for Lox Edge Group of the Sierra Club. I'm also on the single-use plastics team, elimination team for the National Sierra Club and the Zero Waste team. And I work with a number of people that are real experts in the field, and it's really fascinating. First of all, we do not support incineration. We don't think that's a solution. We don't support waste to energy. We think we need to eliminate the use of single-use plastics. Now, I happen to carry all this with me. People say, why do you have a backpack? Hot and cold, bamboo plate, bamboo silverware. And, it's not that heavy. I actually have metal and glass, but it's hard to get that through security. I guess if somebody thinks I might, get excited with a metal fork, so I use bamboo instead, and I clean it. Everybody who works anywhere should have a coffee cup. At work, I have a glass coffee cup. Nobody should show up for work every day and drink out of a styrofoam cup. When I first came to the county, even in the last certain number of years, I'd go to a county office and say, oh, you want a glass of water? Well, let me give you a styrofoam cup. You want to? And I'm like, no, I don't. Please, I really appreciate the staff. I really appreciate everything they're doing. We've got to eliminate single-use plastics. I'm also working nationally to eliminate single-use plastics in the national park system. It's a huge mess. They're everywhere. I ride a bicycle to work. I pick it up every day. I think you should go the maximum that you can do. I don't think any of your departments should be using styrofoam. I don't think any of your departments, particularly not any kind of for plates, glasses, no one should be using straws. You have the right in unincorporated Palm Beach to ask people, restaurants, don't give somebody a straw unless they request it. A straw and request, very simple. Every time I walk in a restaurant, before anything else happens, I say, I do not want a straw. I never like plastic straws. They stick up your nose, they stick in your eye. I don't know why everybody has gotten to the point where they can't. And people say, well, the glass might be dirty. Well, where do you think the straw came from? It's not made in a surgical lab. If you don't trust the glass at a restaurant, then you need to make a decision about that restaurant. Because if they can't keep their cutlery and their glasses clean, then I don't think their kitchen's going to be clean either. So that's not an excuse. I really think that we should not, I pick up litter all day, plastic water bottles should be eliminated, single-use water bottles, either compostable, I think it's worth the extra cost. I really, really hope you will move forward. You have a lot of good recommendations. Go the maximum, and let's get this done, because this is causing climate change, and global warming is single-use items. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Ms. Smith.
Hello again. You're going to get past a copy of what Broward is voting on this morning. It's my understanding Kat Uden was still waiting to be called at 11:15 this morning, so I don't know what the vote is. And unfortunately, they did make some last-minute amendments, so it might be a little hard for you to follow, but they've got additional material which references to the full-length resolution, so you can cut and paste and do your own editing. I agree with Drew. We can't burn our way out of our local landfill problem. Reducing single-use plastic will help to solve our land use problem, and that's really more the way we should be going. An aside, I think I heard from the previous presentation that the reason our greenhouse gas emission reductions over the last 7 years went down was primarily electrical, which is due to the fact, if I understand, FPL retiring some of their dirtier, older power plant facilities, not really tied to actual reduction, and that gets a little tricky because obviously our population has gone up also. So, you know, you can do a lot of things with these numbers. Beach cleanups are kind of like bailing out an overflowing bathtub with a teaspoon before you turn off the tap. That said, I was in one of those pictures, and I encourage everyone to volunteer with Ann Matthews to pick up trash, but by the time we're picking it up out in the environment, it's too late. It's, you know, too burdensome to reduce single-use plastics. How many volunteer hours all up and down Florida is spent on beach cleanups? It's a little burdensome to the volunteers too. So how much is convenience worth? Just bring your refillable cup. It's like, duh. Foodware, the styrofoam leaches chemicals that you don't even know about and probably don't want to know about into your food. If you go to a restaurant and have leftovers and you want to bring it home, which is wonderful, use a reusable container from home. I keep mine in the trunk. If I go into a restaurant, I stick it in my purse. Then you can heat it up in a glass or a porcelain container at your house. Again, what Drew said, bring your own utensils and straw. Last time I checked, restaurants wash their glasses, so why does anybody need a straw? If you have to ask for a straw, perhaps you have a disability and that is fine, but just you have to ask the restaurant, and if the restaurant doesn't have to give you a straw, they're gonna save money, and I think they're gonna like that. Water now does come in aluminum cans. I heard the beeper that time. And it is more effective to recycle an aluminum container than a plastic container, as discussed by staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. Ms. Ladd,
Yes, Gail Ladd, Jupiter, Florida.
could you just pull the microphone down a little bit?
Sure, a bit. Okay. Okay. Of course, I agree with what Linda and Drew have said. I certainly think it's important for staff, and thank you, staff. I really appreciate all you've done for Palm Beach County. It's just such an excellent thing to see people who are so qualified for what you're doing. We really appreciate that. But I think we should encourage the Commission to do as much as we can to the max that they can. As we know, it's all such an emergency right now, and we're really appreciative for what has been done already. We use metal straws wherever we go, and I think it's just a matter of what you're used to. It's a habit that we need to get into to encourage people to do this and get rid of these single-use plastics. I also think, and I don't know who's going to do this, but I think we should put the onus on the manufacturers of these single-use plastics. Don't just rely on people who are cleaning up the beaches after they've all been used. So somehow we're going to have to do that and get rid of this single-use plastic habit that we've all gotten into. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And our last guest will be Ms. Caldera.
It's Sheila Calderon.
Calderon, I apologize.
It's okay. You were close enough. Green Acres, Florida. And yes, the very first thing that I want to say is I am so excited to see this program happening, okay? And I can't wait to see it really being fulfilled. And it's unfortunate that we have state legislation that overrides us doing as much as we can do. That is very, very disturbing to me. But I cannot possibly add anything more to what Drew and Gail and Linda have said, except to say that I really am pleased with the program that I'm seeing up there. Yes, we as a group, as you can guess, try our best to not use single-use plastics. Although I have to say, I can't remember how many times I have walked into a restaurant, okay, and forgot to say, I don't want a plastic straw, okay? And it's inevitably, it's the restaurant that puts it in for you before they even bring you your water. So that's it. Make it doubly frustrating, but nevertheless, blame it on the gray hair. I don't remember as much as I used to, but I need to definitely to be mindful of that, and I think we all do. We really need. I know that we all manage to go into restaurants and fast food places. I do have my bamboo. We call them a spork. Okay, it's a fork on one end and a spoon on the other. And I do have them in my purse, and I keep them there all the time. But remembering when you go up to a counter to make sure that they don't stick the plastic in, like if you're going for yogurt or, ice cream or whatever, and you're getting a cup, and sure enough, you got to remember to say, no plastic, just leave it out. Use what you have. Let's all start to work towards doing that, and we'll be going in the right direction and give as much information to your friends and family to get them there. And I thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, I remember 52 years ago, and I still remember 52 years ago, going to see The Graduate. And I remember those immortal words, not the ones about Mrs. Robinson that you might be seducing me, but the one about plastics. That's the future. And that certainly was a precursor to where we are today. I am of the mind that I'd rather use a carrot than a stick. I understand your feeling about the fact that there's so much garbage out there. And I looked up on the site for 4Ocean, and they are promoting the fact that they have recovered 21 million pounds of garbage. And they're a local company right here in Boca Raton, and they're beyond Palm Beach County, but we realize there's a big problem. But I'm not sure that this is something that we really can get involved in, and I'll listen to my colleagues here. SB 620 is sitting on the governor's desk right now, and I don't think this is the time that we need to show him that we're looking to put additional prohibitions out there which are going to cost our resident businesses something that then they, if this bill ever does get passed, would be able to turn around and claim that we have harmed their businesses. So I don't say that this isn't a problem. I think it's a problem much bigger than Palm Beach County, of course. And a lot of the stuff we're dealing with is coming in from the ocean, probably from China and Japan and Africa, that's just coming in the ocean. So I don't know what the answer is other than to encourage people. You know, I've got my single-use coffee cup here, but I got my single-use bottle here, so I'm halfway there. We do have paper coffee cups instead of polystyrene, so we're making improvements on our way we're acting. As we said before, we have TELUS here, and they are making a product that hopefully our residents will embrace, but I have a problem telling them they must use that. And I mean, that's where I sit on this. So, Vice Mayor Weiss, your turn.
Thank you. As someone who's had the opportunity to spend some time out on the oceans and see the piles of plastic circulating on our planet, it's, you know, it's disappointing to, you know, that people don't understand, or I shouldn't say that, the recognition that plastics don't go away for a long, long time. I think people think they're going to degrade and break down, and as we know, when they do break down eventually, it is into micro pieces, and they do get ingested not only by animals but by human beings, and so they are hazardous to our health. I think it's reasonable, and I certainly hear what you're saying, but I certainly believe it's reasonable that our county take a leadership role on this. We can lead the way. I'm not, I know not everybody is ready to sort of make the switch, but look, I think we have an opportunity to set direction for our property, for our departments, and to help lead our community as to the opportunities for a better, cleaner world. And I don't believe it is beyond, I think once people get used to it, it is, maybe a nuisance initially, but it's very readily adapted to. And so I read, and please, next time, Ms. Smith, when you bring us something, you need to print it out. We don't need to have paper. You can email it to us and we can read it. But I read the Broward proposal, and I think that's something I would certainly embrace, is what they're doing in Broward. And there's enough exemptions there for the airport and their cruise ship terminal to be able to accommodate some of the things that go on those properties. And although we don't have a cruise ship terminal of our own, but I think that was something I could get behind and support as we move forward. And I do agree that the carrots are much more important, and education is clearly important. The other thing I'd like to say is, you see the garbage, and to me, it's just sort of unconscionable. Where does it come from? How do people? You go to other countries, and you don't see litter on the roadways like you do in the United States. I don't know why we feel entitled to throw our garbage out of our cars or drop it as we're walking along when there's receptacles. I mean, I've seen it happen. You see a receptacle, but that's education and helping people understand that they do have an impact and they can make a difference in a really positive way in keeping our environment clean. So that's sort of my thoughts on it, and I'd be curious as to where my colleagues also come down on this.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Commissioner Kerner?
Thank you, Mayor. So it's certainly an issue that I'm interested in, and I thought the presentation and information was excellent. I would really need some more context to understand what the impact would be with our county footprint and our departments and our vendors. Like X amount of pounds of plastic would be reduced, over a period of time. Because I feel like we're talking about this a little bit in a vacuum at this point. The other issue is, what about the airport, and what kind of impact would it have on those operations and contracts and cost of doing business for those that we're trying to get to fly here? And the carbon footprint's not lost on me that they fly in on an airplane, but then we're also going to try to not let them use a plastic straw. Maybe it is an impactful gesture or ordinance, but I just don't know. And I would love to hear a little bit more from the Department of Airports or other parks and other departments about what this would really look like. I know that's a very broad direction from where I sit, but where I sit right now is I don't have enough information and enough context. And most of that's my own ignorance, and I apologize, but today was very helpful. And I do agree with the mayor on the carrot versus the stick issue being the primary motivator for the public.
Thank you, Commissioner Kerner. And we will finish up with Commissioner Marino.
Sure, I'm happy to. And I agree with Commissioner Kerner. We do need more information. But what I think, too, is we really need some education, and our businesses need education. Drew Martin, are you still here?
No, he's gone.
Oh, my God. Tell him I agreed with him on one thing. Okay? I do agree that restaurants should, by request, give you a straw or put plastic in your containers. I do not want to do anything to curb the success of a business because we need our businesses, we need our restaurants, we need to employ people at our restaurants. It's just, it's a cycle of what we do has an impact, not just on one thing, but on many things. So I do agree with Drew when he says, make it by request. The same thing with, this is just another example, but, putting water on your table. How many times do you walk into a restaurant and every seat has water? So we can't dictate what the restaurants can do. We can only educate and make suggestions to them. But as for having dispensers in the building, I don't even know if that's feasible for us to have like you showed, the LK dispenser systems where you bring your own bottle. I don't even know if we have the ability to do that in our buildings right now, or that would be something that we would do in a future building or when we're doing renovations. We don't even have hot water. So when we talk about plastics versus your own utensils, I'm not washing my utensils with cold water. I'm sorry. My utensils are washed with hot water and Clorox and soap. But, I also have a mom that has some issues, so everything has to be really clean. But I do not see getting rid of our vending machines here. Maybe what we put in them, we make sure the containers are recyclable because we need the vending machines here. Just if it's not for our staff to just be able to take a quick break and have something here and have something quick. So that I would not be in favor of getting rid of any of our vending machines. I'm getting kind of like down to the nitty gritty, but we actually really do need more information. This is a great way to start. I don't believe we can tell businesses what they should and shouldn't do, but I believe we can educate them on what we think would be better for everybody concerned. And the straws versus not straws, that's up to the businesses again. That's up to us asking for them or not asking for them. And, for those that are handicapped and that need to use straws, that's just a simple thing. It's actually not simple. That's why they need a straw. So I think I'm rambling, but suffice it to say, the education component is one of the most important components here. And then actually, whatever we use in the building, make it so that it can be recycled, like the glass that I'm drinking. And maybe we have Solid Waste Authority do another presentation as to what is and what isn't recyclable, because I just learned that pizza boxes are not recyclable because they have food on them and grease. So I'm sure there's a lot of people that don't know that. My dad didn't because he put it in the recycle bin. So education, that would be my comment. Thank you.
Vice Mayor.
And one more.
And one
more.
No, you're done. That's
No,
it.
I'm not, because I said it the first day I sat here. We get presentation material put on our desk every single time we sit here. I have the presentation material already in my notebook. It is online for us to print if we want to. I don't believe that we need to have presentation material on our desks when we sit down for a meeting. I know I've said this 100 times, but I mean, when I look at the stuff that's here that, yes, it can be recycled, but we don't have to print it in the first place. I already have it in my notebook. It's printed once, and it's printed 4 slides to a page, so and on front and back, so I don't use all that much paper, but please We don't need to have all these presentations on our desks.
Commissioner Marino, I'm going to politely disagree that I like to have the presentation, so if you feel that you do not want to have it any longer, I'm sure that staff will accommodate you, but I prefer to have it in my hot little hands.
But that means you don't read it before they get it. I read it before they get it.
Well, I think some of us are still not of the mind to bring our iPads down and. I mean,
Well, it's, if we don't start with ourselves, then who are we starting with?
We before you arrived, we've had the same discussion. We told the county administrator have the presentations available for us. So she's like, trying to figure out which way to go on this.
Well, from my perspective, unless there is a change from what has been emailed to us with our agendas, I do not need a presentation on my desk. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Vice Mayor, you're up.
Thank you. I just, in helping to educate my colleague.
Please.
So we washed our dishes in cold salt water for years, and they came. We lived, and they got very clean, and so you can wash your dishes in salt water. We did rinse them off after they were clean with a little fresh water to get the salt off of them, but it does work, and we survived. So, and then to Commissioner Kerner, just to address one of your comments was about the airport and specifically in the Broward proposal. They exempted the operations in their airports, and that they're, where the lounges and so forth were in terms of, even though it was on county property. So.
Can I just ask a follow-up? So, and that brings a larger point is that if we look at the footprint of our county government, and we'll take off the table for a moment regulating private businesses, I would think that the vast majority and bulk of single-use plastics from our footprint would come from the airport. So, and parks, I think, to a lesser extent, but you have hundreds of thousands of people going through the airport. But I don't know. That's one of the things that we agree on, is that we don't have enough information. But why then would we want to go down this road of regulation and then exempt the largest piece of footprint that we have in the county? So I don't know. It's just things that we need to continue to discuss and evaluate, and I'm certainly motivated to join my colleagues on that analysis. Thank you.
And to sum up, I think we all agree we have a problem. I think we all agree we need at least to educate our residents to the opportunities to do something other than, again, a single-use item, whether it's a water container. And, those refillable water fountains are great. You see the number on there, 527 bottles have been saved, and I think that's terrific. I think people like that, and that's the kind of carrot that they, embrace. I don't like a paper straw. I like a plastic straw, and I don't think a straw changes the world, and that's my problem sometimes with some of these regulations where they say there will be no straws, and meanwhile you have this big piece of plastic that's also there. And as I said earlier, we are burning a lot of our garbage, and maybe Drew Martin doesn't like that idea, but I like the idea that we are turning it into energy, which is a good thing. So unfortunately, 3 of us weren't here today to have the benefit of this discussion, but I think the ultimate answer is there's not going to be clear direction on where you should go next, other than I think we all agree that we need to do something as far as education, creating carrots, and I don't think there is a consensus on building a regulatory format where we would tell people they can't use certain items, whether it's on county property or whether it's in other areas of the unincorporated, and we're not even talking about incorporated areas. I applaud the cities that have taken a step in that direction, but to me sometimes that's just window dressing, and they're really not enforcing it. It's like in the city of Boca Raton, where they passed an ordinance that if you threw away your PPE on the floor, they were going to charge you $250 an item. I'm sure they probably have not fined anybody, but it was, again, a statement that they were making that this is not acceptable behavior. I don't think that this is something that at this point notwithstanding Vice Mayor Weiss's comments, I don't think we're ready to give you direction to start drafting something as broad as what came out of Broward. So am I misstating where we are?
Not at all, Mayor.
Okay. I'm going to say we are done with this item, and thank you very much for bringing it forward, and I think we should follow up with it. And again, when we have a full complement up here, we might have some more discussion on it. All right, before I call it a day, I'll give anybody up here an opportunity to say their last words or appointments, or just say, have a good night, whatever. Anybody?
Have a good
Have a
night.
good night.
We
Or
have
afternoon.
the administrator who wants to say something.
I simply want to recognize Ms. Julie Burns, our minutes clerk. She will be retiring. This is her last meeting with
Oh, no.
us as the BCC. Her last actual formal action will be with the zoning commission. With zoning, when it comes before you. She's been with us 16 years, and I'd like to publicly thank her for all the service and support she's given us over the years.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your service. Vice Mayor Weiss, you're going to take advantage of the final word.
Thank you, Mayor. There's nobody here from the county's attorney. Well, you can take this. We have somebody from the county attorney's office. Yeah. I'd like to ask that you all bring back. I learned that I guess in the state of Florida, landlords are only required to give a 15-day notification of rent increases. And I understand some other communities have taken some steps to provide some additional time. I would hate to see somebody get a 30% rent increase and have 15 days to figure out what they're going to do, and I don't think that's fair. And I would like to find out what the options might be. So.
Brian Maher, Assistant County Attorney. So for the record, that's looking for guidance on extending that 15-day
Do we have
notice.
Do we have that authority? And
Okay.
and you know, what would be the process on how we would get that, have that done, and something we could bring back?
Okay, understood.
I think you're referencing Lake Worth Beach was just enacted an ordinance to protect people.
And Miami did. And
Miami, and they're giving a 60-day notice if it's over 5%, but we can get some information on that.
Okay.
Very good. All right, it's time to say goodnight. Good night. Wait a minute. Oh, you know, if you're not up here, you didn't bring the telephone book.
I just wanted to address that issue. There is no law in Florida that says there's 15 days notice. So if you're on a month-to-month tenancy, then it's 15 days. Otherwise, it's going to be what's in your lease agreement. Do we have the ability to do a 60-day notice? Yes, we could do that by ordinance. Any kind of a rent control would require a referendum, but we could do the ordinance to provide additional time. We do need to probably consider whether 620 would have any impact. We think that we have arguments where it would not, but it still would be something we might need to look at if that gets signed.
So I asked, that maybe you could bring this back and we
Sure.
can have a full discussion on it.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
We are adjourned.